Hi everyone. So today I want to talk about and look more in depth about the Nightfall axe, which I'm sure you've seen and heard about before. It's a pretty good looking axe, at least, that has a special chance on hit, namely increasing the target's spell damage taken by 15% for 5 seconds, and this at least partly is a weapon that you can use to justify playing a meme spec such as an enhancement shaman or a paladin. But it's also something some guilds like to bring to the raid to try and increase their spell DPS in a fight. We are one of those guilds. We have an enhancement shaman using it. I'm not that enhancement shaman. And, you know, I just got curious and I've decided to look into this. So what we're gonna be doing in this fight is looking at data from a favorable fight for both spellcasters and the Nightfall wielder, and then see how big of an increase we actually get if we have a Nightfall wielder. Now, as I'm sure you know, Nightfall is crafted by I think it's a weaponsmith, if that is what they're called, and it's rather expensive actually. As you can see, we have 8 lava cores, 5 fiery cores, 10 arcanite bars, and then some small things here. At the moment, this might be 700-800 gold on my server, and if it's paid by a guild bank, then it's not too bad, but it's still quite a lot. So, like I said, we're gonna be looking at some numbers and doing some math. Okay, so the first thing we're gonna look at is the fight here. It's a Ebon Rock fight. I think it's a pretty good duration. Like, you don't want a too short fight, you don't want a too long fight. And we're gonna be partly looking into all the frost damage taken by the boss. So we're gonna be looking at Frostbolt, Shadowbolt, Corruption. We're gonna be looking at Instant Poison, Thunder Fury, Arcane Shots. For some reason, one of our hunters is using that. Seems like we gotta give him a tip or two. And also this Shadowbolt, which is the Shadowbolt of the weapon proc from Deathbringer from Onyxia. Now, there are still 3 more sources, even 4, of spell damage, but none of them are above 10 DPS, so I've decided to just not include them. This Shadowbolt proc is just at 10.2 DPS. And so here we have all the damage, and it summarizes to 3,838. And then we're also gonna use debuffs. On this fight we had 16% uptime on spell vulnerability. And the thing about this uptime is that it's very random. Sometimes in some fights it's been as low as 8%, it's gone all the way up to 25% in some fights, and we just have to pick some number that's roughly representative of it, and 15 seemed just about right. We could really pick any number we want to for some of the comparisons we're gonna do, but 15% seems about right. We're gonna look at the 4 classes that can wield it. Or let's say at least are considered as a wielder. We have the Shaman, the Warrior, Hunter, and the Paladin. And here we have the different abilities that you can use for the different classes to get as many hits as possible. And you see we have the auto attack. For Shamans, they have the Wind Fury with double attack. We have for Warriors, you know, they have Hamstring, if nothing else, that they can use every global cooldowns. Hunters have Wing Clip. Shamans and Warriors have Flurry, and Shamans also have Storm Strike. Now I'm gonna use, let's say, Horde values, meaning I'll include Wind Fury totems or Wind Fury weapon ability. I won't be doing that for the Paladin, however. Now, as for the Shaman, and for all the classes, I've decided to look at how long will it take for them to do 10 auto attacks, and taking all these effects into consideration, how many extra attack will they be doing during these 36 seconds, as there is, well, you know, 3.6 times 10 is 36. So 10 auto attacks, and then with Storm Strike, that will be an extra 1.8 attacks over this 36 seconds. Flurry will give us another extra 3.9, the Wind Fury another 6.28. And the thing that makes this very tricky to calculate, especially for Shamans, is because the more Wind Furies you have, the more times you're gonna crit, and the more times you're gonna have Flurry uptime, and the more Flurry uptime you have, the faster you're gonna attack, meaning you're gonna have even more Wind Furies. So it's not linear basically. If you increase your, let's say your crit chance by 1%, your DPS might go up by 2% each time, because it's gonna give you more flurry uptime, which is gonna give you more Wind Fury, which is gonna give you even more flurry uptime. So it's like a reinforcing mechanic, so to say. But then at the same time, Wind Fury is very, very random. Actually, on my Shaman, when I was a Enhancement Shaman and I had the best possible weapon for Enhancement Shaman, the Sulphurous, on optimal fights with roughly this gear, as you can see here, some pretty good items. Yeah, Savage Gladiator and Don Julio's Band and all of that. But anyway, my best fight, I did, I think, 425 DPS at the end of the fight, you know, when we averaged it out on Magmadar. And on my worst fights, maybe it was down to 150. So it's very, very random how much damage you're actually gonna do as an Enhancement Shaman, and it's very random how many attacks you're gonna dish out. So it is a bit difficult using that, let's say, to try and calculate any average whatsoever, but we have to do it somehow, and this is how I decided to do it. So a total of almost 22 attacks during these 36 seconds, which gives us an average of 0.61 attacks per second. And you know, the more attacks you have, the higher the chance that you're gonna proc it. For the warrior, we're looking at the auto first, and then during 36 seconds, there's 24 global cooldowns that you can use on maybe Whirlwind, Bloodthirst, Hamstring, whatever, as long as you're using every cooldown as soon as you can. You also have the Flurry, you also have the Wind Fury Totem, and it's really the same again, that the faster you attack, the more Wind Fury procs you're gonna have, and that's gonna give you more Flurry uptime, and it's just a feedback system, although not as strong for the well, basically for the non-shaman classes. Now, the warrior, feels like I'm gonna burp, excuse on beforehand. The warrior class will do 48.6 attacks per 36 seconds, averaged out roughly, or 1.35 attacks per second, which is, looking at it relatively, it's more than twice as good as the shaman. And then the same thing again for the hunter with the wing clip and stuff, 1.85 times better than the shaman. Now, just quickly, the paladins, either they could be using Crusader for 40% faster attack speed, or the Seal of the Righteous might be able to proc Nightfall. I remembered seeing part of a stream by S-Fan where he was tanking Molten Core with Thunder Fury, and the Seal of the Righteous proc would actually proc Thunder Fury as well, or at least have the chance to do so. And if that's the case, then they would have roughly 20 attacks per 36 seconds that could proc Nightfall. Either way, paladins are still way worse than a shaman. Now, I do two assumptions here. One of them is that, well, I do a lot of assumptions, but first of all, that the proc chance is actually a chance on hit and not a proc per minute. So, for example, the Crusader weapon enchant can basically proc an infinite amount of times during a minute, so to say. It could proc every single time you attack, and it could proc never. Meanwhile, for example, the Seal of Command for a Paladin can only proc at least a maximum procs of 6 times per minute. You can never go above that, and maybe it's the case for Nightfall as well, that it can only proc, say, 4 times per minute maximum, maybe even less. Or maybe it's like Crusader enchant, and it can proc indefinitely with a proc chance on hit. And I'm gonna assume it's a proc chance on hit. I hope I've kind of managed to explain the difference. Now, another thing I've assumed is that the uptime is never overlapping, so to say. Because if you get more uptime, the chance that the uptime will overlap also increases. So just because you do twice as many attacks doesn't mean you have twice as much uptime, because maybe you get the proc and then 2 seconds later you get the proc again, meaning the first proc lost the final 3 seconds, which just, you know, means that 2 procs doesn't mean you got 10 seconds of uptime, it's just meaning you got 8%, 8 seconds. So it's not linear. You know, if let's say that you have 20% uptime with one character. That doesn't mean that 5 characters will give you 100% uptime, as I'm sure you understand. So anyway, I've looked into the total spell damage done during a Ebon Rock fight. I've taken into account how much uptime the shaman had, and it was about 15%. And then I've multiplied 0.15, that's 15% more damage, with 0.15 for 15% uptime, multiplied that by the total spell DPS, and multiplied that by this relative number. So, for example, assuming a warrior who does 2.21 times more attacks will also have 2.21 times more uptime. And that is how I got these numbers. So the first thing we can conclude is really that paladins and shamans are relatively useless for this. You know, the hunter and the warrior does like almost at least twice as much. They do their benefit to the raid is just way bigger when it comes to wielding Nightfall. It's a really big difference. And so here you can see a warrior would win with a increase of 191 roughly, a hunter with 160, shaman with 86, and a paladin with 55. Not really great. Now of course maybe the paladin, maybe this would work with Seal of the Righteousness, and then maybe we would be looking at 80 increase instead of 55, but it's still worse than the shaman on average. And then we'll look at the percentage increase. So having a Nightfall wielder that's a paladin would increase your total DPS throughout the fight with 1.43%, and that's your spell DPS. This is not taking any melee DPS into consideration. If you had a shaman wielder, you would have a 2.25% increase, a hunter would be almost 4.2%, and a warrior roughly 5%. So, you know, it's absolutely a small increase, and maybe when casters will be doing even more DPS, because they go fire in Anchorage, then this could go up way more, as they simply do. The total, let's say, benefit goes up way more as they do more damage. However, the percentage increase will still be the same. But there is still one very important factor I haven't taken account for, and that is that if you're, for example, forcing a hunter to use, or well, I suppose the hunter could choose to do it themselves, to wield Nightfall, they can't do their optimal rotation whatsoever. So you're also gonna lose DPS from not having the class being able to perform their optimal rotation with their preferred weapons. So for example, the warrior probably wants to go two-handed dual wield fury, but now they're gonna need to go two-handed fury, which is likely a DPS loss. And Nightfall isn't the strongest weapon, you know, I think it was like 61 DPS, it was 67, wrong me, it's 67 DPS, but compare that to perhaps, let's say, Sword of the Brotherhood, which does something like, I think is it 84? It could be, so that would be a big loss. And then the question is, if you would just let this class go with their preferred rotations on weapons, would they, let's say, or let's view it like this, the individual DPS loss from a class not playing their optimal style, is it bigger or smaller than the DPS gain for the casters? So for example, what if the warrior loses 200 DPS because they can't play the rotation they want to? Then essentially what's just happened is that you paid 800 gold to lose 10 DPS overall, and that's just not worth it at all, at least not now. But like I said, this is with data from Ebon Rock, and when mages go fire, they're probably gonna do way more damage. But I think you've gotten at least an idea that maybe Nightfall isn't that great, at least not now. And this is from the data from one of our fights, so it could of course vary quite a lot, but it's not like it's gonna be up or down, you know, by a factor of 2, but maybe 30% up or down. Anyway, I hope you found this interesting. I certainly found it a bit interesting looking into the numbers and actually being able to say something about whether it's worth it or not. With all this said, I think I'm gonna end the video. I'm just gonna say that I also stream, so you can come over to my channel on Twitch and maybe say hi or ask any questions. I stream every few days here and then. You can also subscribe and like it if you enjoyed it, so you can check out some more videos. But anyway, like I said, this was what I had. I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for watching.